Presenters are Sam Kinkaid and Patrick Keown. Sam is the Regional Cyber Protect Officer from the Cyber Crime Centre, and Patrick is our Fraud Operations Manager here at Danske Bank. Sam will focus on the policing cyber aspect of fraud, and Patrick will run through the types of fraud we're seeing and the methods fraudsters are using to gain access to your account and intercept payments. The webinar will last for approximately 45 minutes, and we have time set aside at the end for a Q&A. Hopefully you can see a chat box icon on your screen or behind the three dots. So please type your questions in here and we'll endeavour to answer as many of them as we can at the end. Please use this rather than raising your hand, and everyone's mics are muted. So we are recording today's webinar and we will email out the recording and the slides afterwards. We also have a short series of 1-minute info videos on the different types of cyber fraud that we're seeing, and we've got these on our Danske Bank YouTube channel. And if you look in the chat now, there is already a link in there if you'd like to look at them. It's quite a useful reference point for you to share with any colleagues. So now I'd like to hand over to Sam. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Claire and Patrick and Danske Bank for the opportunity to talk to you briefly this morning. As you heard there, my name is Sam Kinkaid, so I'm an officer with the PSNI Cybercrime Centre as a Protect officer. So within the Cybercrime Centre, my main role is interacting with organisations such as local banks like Danske, organisations across all sectors who have either been a victim of cybercrime or who are looking some sort of advice and guidance to hopefully avoid that sort of scenario arriving. So the key message we try to get across to organisations, and the one that we'd like people to take away hopefully today, is the fact that no matter what sector you're in, no matter what size your organisation is, the majority of cybercrime that we see within law enforcement, and this is across the UK and wider afield, can be prevented by taking simple steps. We'll go through some of those steps quickly this morning. We're not talking about steps that cause a big outlay, they're expensive. These are steps that you could take actually when you finish this webinar and you go back to your office or talk to your colleagues. And the advice we give to organisations comes from the National Cybersecurity Centre, the link you see there at the bottom, who are the government's single point of information for cybersecurity. And that's if you're a sole trader, micro business, all the way up to a large enterprise. They have advice written and tailored for organisations such as yourselves. So the first thing we'll talk about obviously is, why does it matter? Why have you turned up today to listen to Patrick and ourselves talk about fraud and cyber? And from a cyber point of view, one of the sort of myths that we like to sort of dispel to people is the fact that many cyber incidents, in fact the vast majority of cyber incidents, are untargeted. So you may be at an organisation that you think, well, why would anybody be looking at me? Why would I be of interest? I'm not dealing with certain commodities, or I'm not an obvious target. And the fact is, the vast majority of what we see is untargeted. So the fact that you have a device plugged into the internet or connected through Wi-Fi, that exposes you and your organisation. And again, when you look at what role you may be playing in your organisation and what you're manufacturing services, financial charities, all organisations hold plenty of sensitive information, and that's information that's of value to the criminals. So you have basic stuff like payment information in relation to suppliers or customers. You have staff details, you have some personal information about staff details, perhaps medical information, and passwords, which could gain an attacker access to your network and help them perhaps go to another organisation. And the main drive for a lot of what we see with organisations is the fact that cyber criminals want to make money. So can they make money out of taking your data? Is that of value to somebody else? Can they make money out of taking information and then trying to blackmail you? And the wee figures at the bottom, that's from a recent survey that I think was in the local papers. Very much when we look at the economy across Northern Ireland, 90% of businesses they're estimating have 10 people or less with a reasonably low turnover. So the steps and all that we will go through are ones that you can take without causing that expense. And it's important to sort of re-emphasise to people there are things you can proactively do. And there has been stuff in the news, we snapshot some of the headlines over the last 18 months that we would sort of talk to local organisations about. Academia is a very popular target for criminals. A vast amount of intellectual property, of financial data, of personal data, but also you have transport systems, councils and suppliers. And no matter what size of an organisation you may be, you're probably likely to touch on your local council on perhaps transport. You're maybe doing work with local schools. And those sort of contact points then open you up to potentially receiving some form of attack as a secondary victim. And it's not always something that we'll see, obviously, in the headlines, perhaps in the news. We'll see things that are abroad, for want of a better word, or involving nation states. But it's important, if you do pay attention, you'll see probably somebody you know, if not yourself, has already been a victim. So the top threats, and these sort of top threats really haven't changed over recent years. The first one, the main one, ransomware, is seen as the sort of priority one threat against organisations in the UK. And again, that will be reflected by our counterparts in Garda Síochána and across the UK as a whole. And that's as far as impact is concerned. If you get a ransomware attack, it can have a severe impact on your ability to actually perform day-to-day operations in a company, and it will be costs and recovery. But fortunately, it's a very rare event. Phishing is the main one, and one we'll talk about here this morning. That is the main sort of attack that we will see organisations facing on a regular basis. Often untargeted. The successful attacks we'll show you here tend to be more targeted towards your organisation. And then insider risks, again, one that's sometimes overlooked. There will be employees who you have given the keys to the safe to use maybe a term for banking, who have your passwords and have access to your systems. And then you have employees who are basically, you inadvertently click on things and open things. So there is a need to always continually be making staff aware of current threats and steps that they can take. So as an example, if we're talking about phishing, these sort of reasonably untargeted phishing emails are still in circulation, and they cost nothing to do, and that's why. So they follow sort of old advice probably people are used to. Look for domain names that aren't quite right, look for fonts that aren't quite right. You'll see there somebody's tried to use Office 395, hoping that a cursory look somebody might think it's 365 and ignore it. They'll do things like, they see the double F in Office, it's highlighted there, they've changed characters because they're hoping to bypass filters that are in place. So very much like doing a mail shot for winning the Spanish lottery, except it's cheaper. It costs nothing to do, and these are still in circulation, and some of them may or may not be caught by your filter. But again, whilst they're easy to do, and we like to think we can spot them, it's important that you realise that attackers know how we work as human beings. Technology moves on, and they're able to make things appear quite convincing. And this is an example of somebody who would have clicked on a link that came through, purporting to be, in this case, HSBC. And if you look at those two images on the screen, one of those is a legitimate login screen for that bank, and the other one is the one that the criminals were using if you clicked on their phishing email. You as an individual, unless you're told that this is suspicious, will probably not spot the differences. So again, it's important to reinforce to staff that you may get when you may get a login screen, what actions you're meant to take. It's not going to come from an email. We're going to use, perhaps, we're going to type into the browser information that we've got. And anyone who was looking, the one on the left is actually genuine. It has a forgot your username option. The one on the right was actually the one that the criminals just simply copied. And there's a small cursor there in the box ready to type, and it's down to that minutia. So what are we seeing at the minute? Well, the examples we're seeing the last couple of weeks, certainly locally, your organisation will get a very brief email containing an attachment or a link, very generic, and it's a introduction, hello, good morning, something like that. These are ones that came in actually across one organisation in just a couple of hours. We put them there. You'll see very similar, very short one line, maybe a deadline. Your file is going to expire. This is going to be inaccessible. But the instructions are very clear. View attachments, download file, big orange button, download file. Keeping it nice and simple. And if somebody gets into your supplier and gets into their contact list, this is the sort of email you're likely to face coming from your supplier or your customers. What happens? You click on the link. Very similar to the HSBC thing. They simply copy or do a very good copy of a genuine login page. The example on the left, again from the last couple of weeks, where you please enter your username and password to view the document. They make it appear as though you're almost there. You've almost got access to the document. You can see it's blurred out. again, just trying to entice the user into compromising their system. The one on the right is just an example of sometimes they will try to replicate something relating to an organisation. So within Northern Ireland, you'll see the login button there. That's a font that you'll see quite frequently on the side of vans related to the health trusts here locally, which sort of gives you an idea of who they were trying to phish. The one attack method that we've seen that's very effective and recently has involved malware as opposed to trying to get your username. It starts off with this is just an email example I created from a recent one. Very similar to the previous ones. It's a generic greeting, hi. It's a very simple one line and an instruction. They want me to view the file. And depending on the awareness training that I might have got from my organisation or personal knowledge, I might look at that and say, yes, well, I know it's my supplier, but it's a very, it's out of context. It's a very strange email. Will I or won't I click on it? I don't know. But what the attackers are doing is they will have compromised, in this case, market my supplier. And underneath that email will be the email that I sent them the day before or 2 months before. So now I'm looking what seems to be a reply to an email that I recognize. And that dramatically increases the chances that I will now accept that email as being genuine and click on the link or follow the instruction that they want. And what they can do is they will harvest entire email conversations. So you could see 2, 3, 4, 5 emails that you recognize that you might have discussed with somebody on the telephone or in person or at a meeting. And the one at the top is the one obviously the criminals have done. So it's very similar to the previous one, but now it's reinforced by previous conversations that we know to be authentic. So from our point of view, when we're talking to organizations, we'd say, look, it's important to prepare for a phishing incident and not assume that everybody's going to spot them. So do you have a reporting procedure in place if somebody compromises their password or thinks that they've done that? So who should they notify? It could be internal, it could be external, depending on what way your organization is set up. And have you tested it? So if somebody knows that there's a telephone number to ring, is it still a valid number because perhaps it's a couple of years old? Does that number, do you get a response 24/7 if it happens on a Saturday or Sunday or out of office hours? Do you understand your account recovery procedure is an important one, again, to try and minimize the time an attacker has in your account. So if your account was compromised, your email account was compromised, is it somebody in the company? Is it an outside party who restores that account for you and restores the access, who can ensure that the attackers haven't done anything with your system? Patrick's going to talk about the fraud aspect of what we see. One thing we have seen is very effective is, if somebody was requesting a change of bank account, which could be an outcome of a phishing email, making sure you have some sort of documented, recorded system in place. And that's something that we've seen, certainly with the Law Society and other organisations, works very well. And one of the themes that we've had, obviously, coming through this again is you're aware of the risk. Potentially you've come on to this sort of call or you're engaging with your bank because you have an interest in this, but have you taken steps to raise awareness with staff? So every year the government do a survey of organisations across all sectors, and what you will see is a reasonably high level of understanding amongst board members, trustees and managers about the importance of cybersecurity, and a very low level of cyber awareness training provided to their staff. And that gives a gulf, certainly, for attackers to work within. So the organisation may be concerned. If you're not making your end users aware, you're exposing it. Ransomware we discussed. Again, the important thing, we mentioned it was certainly the number one attack as far as impact are concerned. Yes, they'll encrypt your system. They may threaten to release data, which the example on the right-hand side is an example where they did actually release data. From our point of view, what we would say, very technical piece of software can be involved in this. Criminal groups well organized, but how are they getting in? Phishing emails, using weak credentials, weak passwords, not patching your system, so you're exposed to vulnerability. So these are the steps that you as an individual or as an organization can work on and minimize the chance of this sort of incident taking place. Passwords is the main one that we would talk to organizations about. Most people here will know what makes a good password. They will have had internal training. They'll have training outside, maybe with organizations you work with. Recent survey the NCSC did is very similar to ones that we would see in our experience. People use pet names, family names, their date of birth still as a base for a password. And what are the attackers doing? This is an example from Belfast. They were trying to log into an organization. They start off at the top there, username administrator. password 123, and they will go through a list of passwords. They'll exhaust that list, which will run to potentially millions of passwords. And then near the bottom, there are 5 lines. From the bottom, you'll see they change username admin, and they go through their list again. So things you can do, well, first of all, they're trying default usernames. So if you get a piece of equipment or your router or something into your organization, and it comes with a default username, change it. These things can be Google searched and you can find out. So you're certainly, if you don't change it, you're giving probably the attacker half of your credentials straight away. And equally, common passwords. So creating passwords, we don't want to be on that list. The advice that we have from Cyber Essentials, which is the sort of certification body that the National Cybercrime Centre offer, it's the sort of advice we promote to organisations. So if you're looking at passwords, you should be using a minimum 8-character password with no maximum with multi-factor authentication. If you can't do that, you should be using the same minimum 8-character passwords and have a deny list, which means if somebody tries to create a password saying password 123, the system simply says no, please try again. And that gets your password off that common list. If you can't do that, certainly it's the longer the better. Longer the password, the better. So 12-character password is seen as a minimum. Using something like the National Cybersecurity Centre's 3 random words as a way of creating that password, because we will see organisations and people who have a 12-character password, but it's Wednesday 123. So we're not really creating a strong password when we do that. The key takeaway for ourselves, and this is the one thing we would say to organisations, could prevent a lot of what we see. 2-step verification, often referred to as multi-factor authentication, is probably the one thing that I hear most organisations putting in place after an incident. So if it had been in place in a lot of instances, these things could have been avoided, or at least they would have been alerted to somebody trying to get into their account. So we're used to it. It's a free service, whether you're using Gmail or you're using Office 365 as paid for. You'll be aware of it through the likes of online banking, through social media. A code that comes to your phone through an authenticator app. It can be, which is very similar to the RSA tokens people will be aware of, the key fobs. It could be a text message to your phone. This is the bit that the attackers can't get very easily. They might get your password and your username, and when they try to log in, this is what prompts them for that piece of information. So it's a vital important. This is the one thing we can't emphasize enough. When people are a victim, they usually install this and implement it straight away, and then regret that they haven't done it already. We would encourage you as an individual or as an organisation to look. This is a site here that we promote along with bodies such as the NCSC, haveibeenpwned.com, and they're just little screenshots taken from a phone. Simply enter your email address, hit the pwned button, and it will see whether you're connected to a known data breach, and if so, what information was lost. So as an organisation, if you were in LinkedIn, you'll have received a notification you'll have changed your password. If your habit is to use the same password for everything, countless numbers of criminals have an email address and a password that may log them into other sites that you have an account with. Again, as an organisation, you can hit the domain search and you can do a verification system, and you can find out all the work emails that are linked to data breaches here. And we would say to people, well, look at it. What sort of areas are they? If they're related to breaches that aren't related to your core work, do you have a policy, or are you happy with staff and employees using a work email for something that's not work related? If you're not, you may want to consider raising staff awareness. We talked about staff, and this is the one thing we'll certainly when we're in with organisations, when we do awareness training, which will push. Staff volunteer training. It's essential for any organisation who are looking to implement changes to get that buy-in to sort of change the cyber culture and have people happy with putting longer passwords in or creating them. Phishing, as we said, works by targeting the end users and the staff. I need the end user to click on something for me. So it's not going to be something that IT simply solve. They will prevent the vast majority of emails being received by an end user, but you will get ones going through. So it's things you can do. The little icon on the left, again, the NCSC have a free staff training package for 30 minutes or so that any member of staff can do. Covers off on basic phishing, password rules, and the importance of reporting within an organisation. The NCSC run a suspicious email reporting tool, which you as an individual can use, simply forwarding the email to report@phishing.gov.uk. But you can also embed that if you use Microsoft 365. You can have that embedded into your platform so that if they see a phishing email, it gets reported straight by clicking a button. And then ourselves and my colleagues across the Protect Network in the UK, we run awareness sessions such as a cybersecurity exercise that our colleagues in the City of London Police help develop, decisions disruptions exercise, all with the aim again of trying to get that culture embedded within your organisation. Said at the beginning, plenty of advice and guidance on the NCSC's website. For any organisation sort of 250 employees or less, we would strongly encourage you to look at the Small Business Guide. But if you go onto that website, no matter what sector you're in, you'll find organisation or information tailored for yourself. And then just finally from ourselves, reporting, obviously very important from a law enforcement perspective. Also, we would encourage organisations to report to get that guidance. So Action Fraud, the telephone number there you see, that's 24/7 if you're in business or charity, where you can report something and try and get immediate information. You can report through ourselves locally on 101 or online. And our partners in the National Cybersecurity Centre, they have a report function on their website, which organisations can use for information or to look for some sort of guidance. And whilst that obviously is not reporting through to ourselves, they have an incident management team there that can assist. That's my contact details, which will be shared later on. But that's it. Thanks very much for your attention, and I'll just pass over to Patrick.
Thank you very much, Sam. Hopefully everyone can hear me loud and clear. That was really interesting, Sam. I really do appreciate you taking the time to show us that. I suppose why it's important for me is what I'm going to talk about now, folks, is the real life examples of what can go wrong and unfortunately what our customers have experienced when cyber threats happen. So my name is Patrick Keown, and as Claire introduced earlier, I'm the Fraud Operations Manager at Danske Bank. And I manage a really dedicated team of individuals who are very passionate about protecting our customers against the threat of fraud. And we have three main aims. The first two are quite similar. We want to detect and we want to prevent as much fraud happening to our customers as possible. And unfortunately, when our customers are targeted or the victims of fraud, we want to be able to support them as much as we can. So that's the remit of my team, and that's what we try to do as best as possible every day. In terms of the content that I'm going to go through today, there's some very high level agenda. I'm going to set the scene and talk about why I believe fraud is such a hot topic and why we should be really taking it to heart in our businesses. We'll very high level look at the tactics that fraudsters are using to target businesses and those tactics leading into the main scams that are out there at the moment. And we'll also talk about how to keep it safe. I appreciate Sam covered lots of content and I'm going to do the same. So please, I'd encourage you to use the text box or the chat box for any questions that you do have as we move along. So in terms of setting the scene, what I want to talk about is a report that was published last year by the Royal United Services Institute. And that report gave some really important findings. First and foremost, the report showed that fraud against UK citizens, businesses and the UK public purse has reached epidemic levels, and they actually now define it as the volume crime of our time. It's a crime to which UK citizens are most likely to fall victim. And really interestingly, the average victim is aged 25 to 54 in a managerial or professional occupation and typically comes from a higher income household. And I want to just pause on that for 1 second, because oftentimes it's thought that fraud happens to vulnerable people, the elderly, or those who are not financially aware. And that's really a lazy summary. And why I think this is important for us to grasp today is the majority of people on this call will fall into that average victim profile of age 25 to 54 in a managerial or professional occupation and typically from a higher income household. We are the target when we are the victim. It's important that we recognize and accept that. And as well as that, the report established that the impact on the private sector has consequences for both the stability of individual companies and their broader reputation of the UK as a place to do business. So I'm hoping that that report can help establish just how wide and how deep an impact fraud is happening at the moment. And in terms of that, what I want to talk about today is first and foremost around awareness. We do not believe that there is a need to panic, and we believe that awareness is key. And the more we talk about this, the more light we bring to this topic, the better chances we have. And I'm going to talk through some simple, but I believe genuinely effective guidance today that will help you protect your business. And I have an ask. And that is, if you learn anything today, please share that. Please bring awareness to those individuals in your life as well. Talk about what you learned with your colleagues, talk about it with your family, and talk about it with your friends. What I'm going to talk about, I genuinely believe will protect your business, but it'll also help protect yourself and your family and your friends. So fraud is a very, very varied and very deep impact within the UK. We've talked about that already. And just before we launch into the next section, I just want to talk about a little bit about what we do at Danske, because we don't believe we can win this fight on our own, and we believe in strength through partnerships. So on screen at the moment is a wide variety of the partners that we work with day in, day out that help us protect our customers from fraud. And I'd like to highlight two. First and foremost is the Scamwise NI partnership, which is a local initiative that offers brilliant fraud and scam awareness to individuals and to businesses. And the second is the Take 5 to Stop Fraud initiative. Again, it's more nationwide, so it's right across the UK, but it offers so much valuable fraud awareness content. So if you can take time after this session, go and investigate those two different partnerships, and I know that you'll get some really great awareness from them. So in terms of being able to talk about fraud, what I want to do is set the typical fraud journey. And I know from movies, we see fraud as happening, hackers tackling huge corporations across the world. But actually what we see day in, day out is a lot smaller scale, and it's very varied, but it typically has three main steps. First and of all, as Sam alluded to earlier, fraudsters try to gather our data, or they try to make us unwittingly give it to them. And when they have our data, they use that against us, they manipulate us, and they make us do things that we would not otherwise do. And lastly, they use that to commit fraud, the manipulation into basically deceiving and stealing from us. And that fraud, unfortunately, can transpire that we carry out the fraud for the customer. So in terms of the process and the manipulation, what we call that within the industry is social engineering. And what that really is just the use of deception to manipulate individuals into divulging confidential or personal information that may be used for fraudulent purposes. And there are many ways that is happening at the moment, but the foremost reason it's happening is because we're giving away our information. So we always ask a question. If a stranger approached you in the street and asked you for your name, your address, or your bank account details, would you give it to them? And of course, for most of us, the answer is no. However, the majority of fraud, scams, and cybercrime committed today start with a stranger making contact, and for them, information is the key. And there are three typical ways this is happening. First and foremost, it's through what we call in the industry as phishing, when criminals will call you out of the blue pretending to be legitimate, well-known companies. And on screen at the moment, you can see a couple of examples of recent phishing attacks that we know are out there. They involve very well-known companies such as Amazon, BT, Sky, as well as that they know that they use banking industry. So we know that there's ones for Danske Bank out there at the moment, and we also see ones for the PSNI. And what each of these, what the criminals trying to do there is to create false authenticity. They're trying to get us to accept that they are the genuine company that we may have dealings with. The other way that this is happening is through phishing, which I know Sam has already covered, so I'm not going to go through in too much detail. And the third, and actually quite a prevalent way, is through smishing. And again, smishing is just another technical term for when criminals send us text messages, again, purporting to be from legitimate firms and trying to get our personal information. So an incredibly prevalent form of smishing at the moment is through partial delivery scams, which start with us receiving a text message. And I'm sure a lot of us joining in today will have received this message. And this one is from Royal Mail. And what it's telling us is that we have a £2.99 unpaid delivery fee for a package that is in holding with Royal Mail. And they asked us to click a link and submit our details to pay the £2.99, and they'll have the parcel delivered to us. So if you click that link, it brings you through to a website. It's not the genuine Royal Mail website, but it is very, very good impersonation of it. And if you actually go through, it's a data capture form. And what that form's asking you to fill in is lots of personal information and banking information. The first screen there you'll see is asking you for the likes of your name, your address, and details such as your postcode. And then the second screen gets into the financial information. It asks you for your card number, the card name, and it also asks you for your card CVC. What a CVC is the little 3-digit number that comes on the back of our debit and our credit cards. And as well as that, it goes on and asks us for our sort code and our account number. So you can see from receiving a text message that we believe relates to a parcel delivery. A couple of minutes later, from clicking that link, you could give away lots of your personal information, and you could give away lots of your banking information. And a fraudster will use that through social engineering to conduct fraud. So that's a very prevalent one that's out there at the moment. As well as that, and as Sam alluded to, we certainly do not want to discount the likes of malware or ransomware. We know that, unfortunately, whilst uncommon, it is slightly on the rise. We are seeing more of it. So obviously, we want to raise that to your attention as well and make sure that you're fully briefed with it. Not going to go into too much detail because Sam covered it very well earlier. So what we know is fraudsters are looking for our data. When they have our data, they want to manipulate us into conducting fraud. And the most common way that this is affecting companies within Northern Ireland today is through a fraud we call invoice redirection or mandate fraud. And this fraud happens very simply. In the most common example, you as a business are in relationship with a third party. Potentially you're doing a deal or a piece of work, and your communication is typically via email. Those emails are going back and forward, and everything is progressing as you'd expect up until the point in time where you need to pay an invoice or to finish the contract, for instance. So the invoice is received then as you'd expect. You review the details, the sort code and the account number of the beneficiary, and you go off and you make the payment, expecting that everything is fine. But unfortunately, what we see is that the fraudster has manipulated this cycle, and instead of the money going to your genuine customer or your third-party client, it's going to a bank account controlled by a criminal. And how they do that is by engineering the email chain to actually divert the funds to an account in their name. And what we see is that the criminals will access your inbox and observe that for quite some time. They will see the email chain come back between you and your third party. And at the point an invoice arrives in, or you're prepared to send an invoice out, they will intercept that email and they will go in and they will alter the beneficiary details of the payment, which is the details where the money's going. And they will circumvent that, meaning it never reaches your third party. It actually goes to the account of the criminal. And all they're doing is altering key pieces of information. All of the other genuine email traffic happens as you'd expect and is unaltered. So here's an example on screen at the moment of a real life version one of our customers had of this. And it's another variation on what we've talked about. And what it is as a supplier that the company was doing a deal with, advising them that unfortunately they've had to change their beneficiary details. So whilst you have the sort code and account number of your supplier or your client on record, for some reason you're no longer able to pay that because they've had an issue, in this case an audit that's ongoing. So the two ways in for a fraudster here is either by manipulating the payment invoice or by manipulating the data that you hold on file for the person you're expecting to pay. And in these situations, we see lots of different companies being targeted. There's no common theme. Fraudsters will target anyone who has the capacity to pay a third party or a client. So you can see on screen there at the moment, lots of different recent examples of that. You can actually see they've targeted Dublin Zoo recently. And right across the UK, this is costing us 56.7 million in 2021. That's the amount of fraud that happened through this invoice redirection fraud. The next one I want to talk about is what we call CEO fraud. CEO fraud, as a name, is a bit of a misnomer. In effect, what it is someone pretending to be a senior member of staff of your organisation, trying to manipulate a more junior member of staff into making a payment. And that payment, of course, will go to a fraudster's account. So you can see on screen at the moment an example, again, of what we were able to find from one of our customers. Reading through it, it says, "Hi Jeff, sorry for the informal email. I can't get into my or can't get onto my my normal inbox on my phone. And it goes on to explain that they need to make an urgent payment, and they've asked the person, Jeff, to make that on Stephen's behalf. And what we see there is that criminals will have done their homework, and they will have an idea who the correct person is to target within your organization. They will try to find out who has the ability to make transfers, and they'll do that by data harvesting the likes of the company's house, the likes of your own internal website maybe, and actually your LinkedIn profiles too. They will typically try to instill a sense of urgency about the payment being processed. They'll explain that somebody has to board a flight, or they need an urgent payment to seal a deal. And they also have a tendency to target businesses during key holiday periods. We've noted a lot of activity over the Easter periods, over the 12th fortnight, and over Christmas. And the simple reason for that is that it is likely the CEO or whoever the major players within your business are out of the office. So it's a key period for activity. And what they will typically do is they'll either use a spoof email address, or they'll provide an excuse for not using their corporate mailbox. And in terms of spoofed email addresses, below are 6 examples that I've quickly prepared today to show that are based on our own internal email structure, and only one of them is correct. And actually, by quickly looking at those, you could believe that all of those are genuine Danske Bank emails. You would act on the instruction, and you could potentially be convinced into making a payment, believing it is a more senior member of staff asking you to do that. So that is a very common way that fraud is happening to businesses too. And in 2021, across the UK, that accounted for £12.7 million worth of funds stolen from businesses. And it's not only happening on email. We've started to see this migrate onto WhatsApp, and actually we've been a target of this. On screen is a message received by a member of staff from our organization, and they received a WhatsApp that says, "Hi, I'm not sure you have this. This is my new number. Let me know once you receive my text. Thanks, Vicky Davies." And Vicky is our CEO. And this message was received by someone within our organization who does have the capacity to make payments. Now, thankfully, that person knew Vicky was in the building that day and walked over and knocked her door and was very quickly able to verify that this wasn't genuine. But it's just to bring awareness that not only is this happening on email, but it's also happening on other channels such as WhatsApp and text message. So they're the 2 most common forms of scams impacting businesses at the moment within Northern Ireland. In terms then of how to keep it safe, there are a couple of different things that we would recommend that you should consider. And first and foremost, that's around the controls you have in place within your business. So firstly, have controls. For new payees or changes to existing ones, always verify account details with the intended beneficiary before sending any funds. And the best way to do that is by picking up the phone and speaking to the person. That sounds a little bit old-fashioned at times, and I appreciate that if it's a manic day and a lot of payments to be made, it may feel like an inconvenience, but this is the best way to protect yourself. Reach out to a person that you know within the organization you're dealing with, establish that connection, and phone them and just say, "Are these details correct? Or can you please confirm the payment details to me?" Very simple, very effective. But as well as having controls, the best thing to do as well is to ensure that you're testing those controls. So regularly follow through on your procedures or on your processes to make sure that your staff are actually following them. As well as that, and as Sam alluded to earlier, ensure that you're using strong, unique passwords across all of your accounts and enable 2-factor authentication where possible. And obviously, if 2-factor authentication isn't something you're using, we would say speak to your IT provider who may be able to help with this. As well as that, then, we believe awareness is key. So we would encourage you to communicate the key risks amongst your colleagues and ask yourself, do you have a fraud-adverse culture, and are colleagues empowered to challenge? Are colleagues allowed to sit back and stop and go, okay, something doesn't feel right here. Something about this payment isn't accurate, and I want to take the time to investigate it and make sure that everything's okay before I send this money. And then lastly, we always say consider requests for payments for what they are. if you're being rushed, if you're being panicked, and if something just doesn't stack up, all may not be what it seems. And we would really encourage, do not send money until you're 100% confident it is going to the destination that it's supposed to arrive to. When we transfer funds, it's like handing somebody cash. It goes that quickly. So make sure that if you're feeling rushed, if you're feeling panicked, that's a key sign to step back and think, is something not right here? And the last thing is obviously just to ensure that all of your devices and networks are protected. And please do use antivirus and anti-malware detection where you can. And that's simply, as Sam alluded to, not letting the fraudsters in the back door. So what we've talked about very briefly today is the typical journey of a scam and how it starts with data, manipulation, and ends in fraud. So to quickly summarize, we believe that genuinely through awareness, through using tools such as two-factor authentication, strong passwords, and detected devices, we're protecting our data and saving ourselves from being the victims of fraud. And as well as that, if we're employing effective and actionable controls within our business, even if our data does get out there, we can still stop it before payments are made. So thank you very much for listening to me today, go through that. I hope you found it useful. Again, just to encourage any questions into the box. As well as that, I've included my email address on screen, and I'd be more than happy to take any queries offline should anyone have genuine concerns that or questions that you'd like to send through. To reiterate some of the points from earlier as well, a copy of today's recording and presentation will be sent out tomorrow. And at this point in time, I suppose, Clara, I'd like to hand back to yourself and we'll move into the Q&A section.
Okay, thanks very much, Patrick and Sam. I just have a couple of questions here for each of you. Sam, firstly, my business falls into the micro sector you referenced in the presentation, and we don't have a lot of funding for cyber. What key steps would you recommend we take?
I mean, I think the key steps we would recommend are the ones that I've outlined and Patrick reinforced. When we look at what works, it is the strong and separate password for your business email accounts and certainly the priority accounts that you may have, and any associated things like user accounts that access Sage or some sort of banking payment system. The two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication that we both referenced, it is something that sometimes I think people perceive as being an inconvenience, maybe because of prior experience in the past. Using an authentication app, which is free at the minute, makes it very easy. And as I said, a good indicator for ourselves is that when most incidents happen, we go out, organizations have perhaps paid for some assistance, and that's the first thing that's highlighted. So we know it works. There are ways that criminals will try to attack it, but that again is back to what Patrick said about social engineering, to try and persuade people to provide a code to them. Awareness, building an awareness around implementing 2FA helps protect against that. But certainly those are the two things we would strongly promote. The NCSC website, the small business guide we outlined, really sticks to those sort of key points and provides links to organizations. So, if you are trying to do some of this internally, if you go onto their website, cyberaware.gov.uk is one that they use for micro businesses, and they have very short, sharp points, actions that you can take. And if you use 365, click here, it tells you what the settings are, so you're not having to search endlessly. Yeah.
Great, thanks very much, Sam. And whilst we're with you, Sam, just one more. Is there an easy way to keep in touch with current threats?
Yeah, well, certainly. I know all organisations, banking organisations, put their information on their websites, and people log in. From a cyber point of view, the National Cybersecurity Centre, the NCSC, have a weekly threat report which people can sign up to, which will send them out an email. They also have, I think they call it something like a coffee break monthly summary aimed at small businesses, micro businesses. And I'll provide the link for registering that against a free sign up, and you get that through by email. I'll send that on to yourself to share with people tomorrow with the slides.
Great, thanks very much. Patrick, we have a question here for you. We have recently seen our customers fall foul of invoice redirection. We'd been thinking of adding something at the end of our emails to confirm that we won't change bank details without phone calling. Is this something you'd recommend? And if so, does Danske provide templates to help us? Patrick.
Thanks. Definitely something we would recommend, and we actually are aware of a large number of our customers installing something very similar of late, because invoice redirection fraud, it's the biggest threat that's out there in terms of fraud that we're seeing. Don't have a template, truth be told, but it'd be more than, I'm not sure who asked the question, but please do actually get in contact with me separately, and I'll be more than happy to work on that. And if we can get something that works for one customer, we'll happily share it with everyone else.
Okay, thank you. Yes, John, if you'd like to contact Patrick or otherwise me, we can help you out there. Just one more question, Patrick. You mentioned having a fraud-averse culture. Do you have any best practice suggestions for achieving this?
Yeah. I suppose that there's a few things that I would mention. Maybe some of it I've covered a little bit. I suppose I'd start with your payment procedures, making sure that first and foremost, you do have a defined payment procedure, and secondly, that you're regularly testing to ensure that procedure is followed. And I suppose maybe best practices on that procedure would have what we call dual authentication, which means at minimum of 2 people must verify every payment. That is available through our district setup. Something we would definitely recommend, because it's 4 eyes on every payment. It's twice the common sense approach that's being applied. Obviously, if there is a change to one of your regular suppliers' details, or if you receive an invoice in for payment, you got to validate those details. Take the time to ensure that where you're sending your money to is going to the place you intend it to. And simply there, the best thing that we can recommend is a phone call. Obviously, we know that all of us work in really busy, hectic schedules, and one of the things that fraudsters are trying to do is always manipulate that and make us feel pressured and make us feel rushed. So if it can come from top down, a real powerful thing to say is that your employees are empowered to take the time to verify payments, to not feel rushed, to take, if it's 30 seconds, if it's 2 minutes, to have that phone call with the supplier, or to verify a change in beneficiary account details. It's there, and you're empowered to do that. Sam mentioned all of the fraud literature that's out there. I would really encourage people to use that, display it prominently around your offices, share it willingly amongst your staff, because again, that can just keep awareness at a good level. And then maybe as well as that, ensure that fraud's being talked about during your risk forum meetings or your regular finance team meetings, just again, to bring awareness, to bring a bit of a light to it, to make sure that when people are carrying out payments, it's one of the things that are in the forefront of their mind.
We'll maybe get that from the 5.
Great. Thanks very much. That concludes today's questions and presentations. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. And thank you very much to Sam and Patrick for your presentations and insights. As we said earlier, we will be sending out the recording and the presentations tomorrow. And also Sam has included a short survey there. If you wouldn't mind, if you had time just to complete it for him, that would be super. So thanks again very much for joining us. We hope you found this useful, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.